Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figure It Out Productions. The following video is part of our Quick Shoot series.
Hey guys, it's Adam here. So this is going to be a series on the 6th generation of game consoles. This first video will be about all of them, generically, as a whole, and then I'll do individual videos on each one. I did a series similar to this on the 7th generation of game consoles, Xbox 360, PS3, and the Wii, and then a preview series on the 8th generation, the Wii U, Xbox One, and PS4. I had no intention of doing a series on the 6th generation of game consoles, and the only reason I'm doing this is because of a lot of people requesting it. There were so many people that said, please do the same thing for this generation. And so this comes exclusively by fan request because you guys wanted it, so I hope you enjoy it. And thank you very much for watching those and for watching this. So let's kick it off by saying, well, my opinion on the generation as a whole, which is I love this generation. I have a love-hate relationship with this generation. Let's put it that way, which I'll explain as we go. I think that this generation, isolated on its own, is either the second best or best generation of gaming in game consoles ever. Its only competition is the 4th generation, the SNES Genesis debate. And I think, and this is just a theory, which has all sorts of holes in it, and you could poke at. It's just a general theory that I can't prove, of course. But the theory goes that the reason this generation was so great, as well as the 4th generation, was because of the generations that preceded them. And what I mean by that is if you look at, let's say, the 3rd generation, where the NES and the Sega Master System were around, what you had there was you had developers who were clearly trying to make things bigger than what the hardware allowed. They spent the whole generation really learning what the formula of a 2D game was and figuring out like how a 2D game should work. But again, we're limited by the technology they had. So it was like a practice run. And then when they got into the generation after that, the Genesis SNES, they had vastly superior technology by comparison to work with. They figured out, like, this is how a 2D game should work, which is why you end up with some of the best 2D games ever on that generation. Probably the best 2D games are all on there. Because after that, 2D was mostly phased out when you got to the 5th generation, which was where you entered the Saturn, the PS1, the N64, and they basically had to restart. They had to reboot the system, basically, because now they're making 3D games. And 3D games do not work on the same type of structure. You can tell when you look back on them that a lot of them were very, very crude. I mean, we know that. But my point is that they had to relearn the mechanics of everything. But they were, again, limited by the technology they had to do that. And you can tell they wanted to do something more. And that's when you get to this generation. They spent that whole previous generation figuring out how 3D games should work, and then they had the technology to do it. Which is why this generation had some amazing games. Absolutely amazing games. It also helps that you had 4 consoles, which is very rare. But yeah, you had just phenomenal gameplay experiences, and I'm still not sure if I like this generation better than the 4th generation. The jury's still out for me. And the reason for that, of course, is that this generation has both my 1st and 5th favorite console, whereas the 3rd generation had my 2nd and 3rd, the Genesis and the SNES. And then, just for anybody who's curious, 4th was Xbox 360. So it's a toss-up, I don't know. I can go either way. Now, this generation, I'm going to talk about some of the things that it introduced us to and some of the things it took away from us. It introduced us to what I would call enhanced definition. Some people will argue that it's high definition. Take your side, I don't care. The Dreamcast kicked that off by actually being capable of a 480p signal. The PlayStation 2 is capable of upwards of 1080i, Xbox 1080i, and GameCube 480p. Now, unfortunately, none of us really got to experience this back when it was relevant, as far as I know. I know I certainly didn't. Our older TVs were not capable of using any of the formats that would allow for us to view these consoles properly. But I think that's actually a large part of the reason these consoles can stay relevant. Not commercially relevant, but socially relevant, is because when you hook any of them up with modern televisions, as long as you have the proper setup, they look really good. Really good. Except for the PS2, unfortunately, doesn't really clean up very well. I wish it did, but it doesn't. Now, when I'm saying that, I want to make this clear, because a lot of people argue with me a lot. Image clarity, resolution, and graphics are three completely different things. So don't group them together. Some, especially these two, are capable of higher resolutions, but higher resolution does not always mean clean image. Whereas low resolution can still mean very clean image. And so, long story short there, if you have any of these consoles and you can afford it, I would say go out and get the appropriate cables to hook them up. You know, VGA, component, and component. These two are super cheap to get component cables for. This is extremely expensive. These are much more common now. So I'd say go that route if you have a Dreamcast. This generation also introduced us to DVD support. The PlayStation 2 introduced that by you got to play movies finally at home on your console. It was very, very nice. I mean, this was a new thing in Europe and North America, mostly North America. I don't know how much this was relevant in Europe, but Asia, you know, for the longest time, especially Asian countries, had other formats for movies that they would play on video game consoles, VCDs specifically, which was a format that never took off in North America, and I don't think took off in Europe. But DVDs took off here and in Europe as well. And the PlayStation 2 was able to do that, as was the Xbox. The Xbox had a bit of a gimped version of that by requiring like a special dongle thing that you would plug in, and then it would allow for a remote to play it. So neither of them were that great at DVD players in hindsight, but they were capable of it, which is a bad thing to a certain extent, which I will talk about in a bit. We'll save that for now. This generation introduced us to what I would say is easy access online gameplay. Previous generations, going actually all the way back to the fourth generation, the Genesis SNES, were capable of online play. It was just not common. Like, no one did it. The Saturn is actually capable of it as well. I actually have the Saturn Netlink modem. You can play online with those consoles. It's just not easy. This generation, the Dreamcast, of course, kicked this generation off, and it came with a modem right out of the box, and was actually upgradable. You could get a broadband adapter for it and everything. The PlayStation 2, of course, capable of it, and they eventually released a modem for it, and you could play online. This is a broadband modem. The Xbox actually had it built in. This was the first console ever to have a broadband modem built right into the console. And the GameCube also was capable of it, had modems and a broadband modem released, and you would attach it to the bottom, although unfortunately they're very uncommon. Xbox, obviously, I think did this the best because they had it built in. It was much more standard, and of course they had the Xbox Live service. So they really kicked off this idea of playing online. I mean, Sega should get a lot more credit for that than they do, but it is what it is. It's just because they weren't around long enough, I guess. We got DLC, believe it or not. That actually started in this generation, and while I find DLC, I think most of you out there probably find DLC to be very problematic as the way it is interpreted now. This generation, in my opinion, was the only generation that did DLC correctly. As far as I know, the GameCube and the PS2 did not have DLC. They might have. The PS2 probably did because it was capable of housing a hard drive. I don't know if the GameCube ever did. The Xbox obviously had it. Believe it or not, though, that guy started it. I know, right? The Dreamcast actually started the whole DLC thing, but it did it nicely. The way the Dreamcast did it, as far as I know, there was only a handful of games that ever used it, and the one that comes to mind is Sonic Adventure. You could download additional, just little things for the game, nothing special. And same with the Xbox. They had the Xbox Live service, and there were games that had additional content. And in this generation, I felt like they did it right. They had a game that was done, it was completed, and it was released. And if the game sold well, and people really liked it and wanted more of it, they went, you know what? Okay, we'll make some more levels. And the game I always point to is Star Wars Battlefront 2 for the Xbox. Phenomenal game. I absolutely love it. And they said, okay, you know what? Everyone really likes it. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of the maps from Star Wars Battlefront 1 and a couple extra characters, and we're going to put them out there on Xbox Live, and we're going to they gave away some of it for free, and they charged like a couple bucks for the others, and you could download it, and there you go. You have your DLC. If your console saved it, it's still there unless the hard drive died, but unfortunately, unless you have a modded console now, you can't reacquire it. which sucks. The Dreamcast, actually, you can, because you can download it through private servers and just stick it on your VMU, because that's how they did it. They housed DLC on the VMU. There was nowhere else to put it. So it's DLC that's reacquirable now, and that's cool. Moving on, things we lost. You can debate this as good or bad. We lost memory cards, sort of. Technically, memory cards held out until the next generation with the fat version of the Xbox 360, but that was not a practical thing. This was the last generation that used them practically. Ironically, except for the original Xbox, which was the first one to have an internal hard drive. And while it had memory cards, I don't know anybody that used them. Hell, I don't even have one. And take it however you want it. I mean, like, internal hard drives, the advantage is obvious. You know, it's a lot more storage space. You have less clutter. You don't have to keep buying memory cards to have around to save your games. You don't risk losing any of them. Of course, the problem there is that, you know, if the hard drive dies, you lose everything. But you also lose charm. And charm is something it's difficult to put into words, really. But basically, with a memory card, it was just another thing you could debate about gaming and why you liked one console versus another. You know, and I kind of have to go back to, like, you know, playground school type of debates here. But, you know, like, let's say, you know, one guy's favorite console is the GameCube, another guy's favorite was the PS2. They could sit there with their memory cards, and that's just another thing they debate. They go like, well, I like the PS2 memory card because it's black and it's so cool. And he's like, well, the GameCube one's smaller and holds more memory. Ugh. You know, like it's just something to debate. You know, the Dreamcast memory card, of course, was a VMU. You know, it was a little portable thing. It was, I think, hands down, that's the best memory card ever made. It doesn't hold the most by any means, but it's just the neatest one. But we lost that. That's gone now. It's a little piece of charm that's gone. And along those lines, and this one kind of, I didn't even realize really until I sat down to start to make this video, this is the last generation that used conventional controller ports. I mean, I guess I knew that, but I didn't really think about it. You know, you look at it, and it's something that defines the aesthetics of the console. I mean, look, 4 controller ports, 4, and then 2. And it's something, again, you debate. It's like, well, the Dreamcast can play 4 games all at once, you know, 4 players. Haha, PS2 can only do 2. You know, it's just something you debate. And it makes a distinct difference in what the console looks like. And the ports themselves are unique to that console. So if you pick up a controller, even if you don't know what the controller's for, I'm assuming it would have to be a third-party controller for you to not recognize the controller. But you could look at the end, the tip of it, where you would plug it in, and you go like, oh, okay, that's for the GameCube, I recognize that. It's something that's gone now because you have USB ports. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just an observation. It's just some little piece of charm that we lost with this generation after it ended. So, yeah, that's just an acknowledgement of that. Now, this generation, another thing that's actually interesting about it is that it's the last generation that used customized media. What do I mean by that? Well, now, the 8th generation, every console uses Blu-rays across the board. The generation before that, you know, Sony, of course, used Blu-ray, but that wasn't really custom to them because they were also using it as a movie format. And, of course, the Xbox 360 and the Wii both used DVD technology. Now, you look at these, and the GameCube, technically it was an iteration of DVD, but obviously it was miniature. And, of course, the Dreamcast used GD-ROMs. Now, these both use DVD, but it was new at the time, kind of like Blu-ray was new at the PS2. But what I guess I'm saying is these are the last consoles that used some sort of special medium. Before that, it was, of course, cartridges and so on. And does that make a difference? No. At the end of the day, you're looking at a CD. I guess the GameCube is debatable because it was miniature, but yeah, whatever. It's just something else to acknowledge. Now I want to talk a little bit about problems that spawned from this generation. And the most obvious one is the change in power. We obviously lost Sega. They started off the 6th generation with the Dreamcast, which incidentally is another thing we lost, just a little side note here. Bits. This was the last console ever advertised as being measured by bit power. You remember, of course, 16-bit, 8-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit. They advertised the Dreamcast as 128-bit, and when the PS2 came out, they started talking about polygons. Bits were irrelevant. So, little thing, not a big deal. But anyway, we lost Sega as a hardware manufacturer, which of course is heartbreaker to me, but it is what it is. And we gained Microsoft and the Xbox. Now, think what you want of either Sega or Microsoft. Those are just the facts. I love Sega. I like the Xbox brand, though I'm not the biggest fan of the Xbox One. But they were both really great consoles, and they contributed to this overall generation and making some really great stuff. I feel like we lost another really big piece of gaming with this generation going into the next one, which was what I would define as game consoles developed for us, for gamers, which is what you are if you're watching this video, because this is a video on my channel. Like, nobody's going to watch this unless they're really into video games. That's just who would watch something like this, and thank you for that. So these machines, for the most part, were developed for you. They were not developed for your aunt and your uncle or your brother who doesn't give a shit about video games but likes movies. You know what I'm saying? We had our dedicated game consoles, and we had ones that hyper focused on games. But unfortunately, we also were set down the path, mostly by Sony, unfortunately, of I'm going to make a machine that does everything first, or does something else first, and then plays games. It is what it is when I say that Sony released the PlayStation 2 fully marketing it as a DVD player. It's just how they went about it. And it's sad, unfortunately. But, I mean, it worked for them. It was a brilliant business decision. They sold like 120 million of these things? If you combine the GameCube, PS2, or GameCube, Xbox, and Dreamcast, they don't even add up to like half of what the PS2 sold. It sold a ridiculous amount. So it was a brilliant business move, but I feel personally hurt gaming in the long run because, and I'm going to sound like a fucking hipster, and I don't want to because I don't like hipsters, but they made it too mainstream. They made it so that like everyone should really get into game consoles, and it just, again, it's one of those things where you lose a lot of charm in that process, and I don't know, that's just my opinion on it. Of course, Microsoft is pretty much just as guilty of that, and I don't blame them, really. I mean, it's a business and it's a market. They want to make a profit, but you lose some charm. Go out if you don't have these consoles. Go out and get them now. Right now, every single one of these is uber cheap, and the reason for that, of course, is that the generation that played these as little kids, which is people much younger than me. Because by the time these came out, I was already in high school, The generation that played these as kids are not old enough yet where they're working and they have enough money to go out and rebuy their collections that they had as children. And that's what makes retro stuff eventually valuable, which is why SNES and Genesis stuff is skyrocketing right now. It's why N64 and PS1 and Saturn stuff is really starting to take off right now. Dreamcast is already starting to feel that. Dreamcast games are already getting way more valuable. So now's the time to strike if you like these consoles. Go out and pick them up because you can get them really cheap. The games are starting to go up a little, but it's still okay. It's still all right out there. Because this is going to be, I feel, one of the, in the long run, down the line when we're all playing on streaming services and there's no more local hardware or anything, and you just look back and you go like, man, I really kind of want to just play something where I'm not dependent upon an internet connection. You'll look back and go like, this was probably one of the best choices. And first of all these consoles are reliable, and also that they're all completed stuff. I mean, like, this was before the era of patches. So when a game came out, it had to be done. It had to be finished. It had to be bug-free and ready to go if you wanted it out there. And DLC it existed, but it was very rare. So you basically always got a complete game. And I miss that. I miss knowing that. Because now when I buy something, even for the 360, I buy it knowing that once its servers are down, I'm getting a very gimped game. Like, yes, there were online games for these consoles that are gimped now, in a sense. Like, Phantasy Star Online for the Xbox is probably the most definitive example, because it doesn't work at all. But basically, you can always have an offline single-player campaign that is no different now than it would have been 10 years ago. Except that now you probably have a TV that is capable of playing it in higher resolutions, and you have a much cleaner image. So, yeah, that point is, this generation I think will hold up very well in the long run, and these machines will probably be sought after more. Maybe not so much the GameCube, not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because of the amount of Wiis out there that can play GameCube games. GameCubes are incredibly common right now. Xbox, these things will probably pick up a bit. PS2s, I don't know. I mean, not that the PS2 was bad or anything, but there's so many of them out there. I don't know if the hardware itself is ever going to be valuable. The games probably will, but I don't know about the hardware. And the Dreamcast is already starting to go up because of the fact that there was only 10 million of these ever made. The least selling of all three of these, or all four of these. And there's less and less of them all the time. So that's kind of it. Thank you guys for watching this. Please stay tuned to the next one where it will be on the Dreamcast, and then the PS2, then the Xbox, and then the GameCube. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.